Cassian Andor. Don't matter what you tell me or tell yourself. You'll ultimately die fighting these bastards. Wouldn't you rather give it all at once to something real?
We've chosen a side. We're fighting against the dark.
They're everywhere. They're watching me now.
You realize what you set in motion? People will suffer.
Time has come to force their hand.
At what cost?
Everything.
I sense a plot to destroy the Jedi.
Hello there. The highest levels are involved in the conspiracy.
Nancy Pelosi is Emperor Palpatine.
We must be the great arsenal of democracy.
I love democracy.
All who gain power are afraid to lose it.
Fear. Will keep the local systems in line.
Truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view.
Welcome to the Conspiracy in the Force podcast. Star Wars, conspiracies, and more. With your host, me, Conspiracy Kyle.
Rebellion's built on hope.
For God commanded the light to shine out of darkness.
As long as there's light, we got a chance.
This is what Luke says before he goes to the toilet.
This is Red 5. I'm going in.
Good morning. Sunday morning.
Welcome back to Conspiracy in the Force, Star Wars, conspiracies, and more. As always, I'm your host, Conspiracy Kyle, and I'm excited and energized to be back with you to bring Season 2 of the podcast to life. As the short podcast I recently posted stated, I took some time off this summer to focus on personal things. Nothing bad necessarily, just a different kind of focus. But now I'm back and I'm ready to roll. If you have any comments, suggestions, or questions for me, as always, please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or Instagram at conspiracy_Kyle, and remember that's conspiracy with a K. And you can always email the show at conspiracyintheforce@gmail.com. That conspiracy is with a C, just to confuse you. That being said, let's get into today's episode. This episode will discuss the new Cassian Andor series. We'll be talking about some of the basic plot elements of the show, some of the characters involved, and also some controversy as some of the actors who are in the show have made some comments that have really rubbed people the wrong way, and you're not really going to be surprised when you hear it. First, let's discuss the timeline, for those who weren't aware, or who could use a refresher. Since the Star Wars shows and movies never seem to follow a linear chronology. Starting with the original Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope, the movie Rogue One, which introduces the character of Cassian Andor, takes place immediately before Episode 4. At the end of Rogue One, you see Princess Leia receiving the stolen Death Star plans with Darth Vader in hot pursuit. Then from Rogue One, we're going back 5 years to detail the rise of the rebel spy/intelligence agent Cassian Andor. From what I've read, the series is designed to cover the entire 5-year period. This series is going to be only 2 seasons, which the first season will cover 1 year, and per Tony Gilroy, the showrunner, he's already mapped out Season 2, which will consist of 12 episodes in 4 3-episode blocks, with each block representing a year of the story. So, there you have it. So now let's talk about the main character himself, Cassian Andor, who died in the Rogue One movie. Spoiler alert, from about 6 years ago. Cassian is a very complicated character, and he was tasked with doing some dangerous spy work for the Rebel Alliance. You see in the first few minutes of Rogue One that he's meeting with an informant who has important information for him about the Empire's new weapon, the Death Star. and we see Cassian shoot down this informant while making his escape from stormtroopers, as the informant himself was injured and would have been captured. So it set the stage right away for how, on occasion, terrible deeds need to be committed by the rebels in this dangerous war they're undertaking against the Empire. Per actor Diego Luna, Cassian is just an average guy, which shows that we can all be heroes. He's not a Jedi, he doesn't have a strong muscular physique or anything, he's just very passionate about what he does. We also find out via some tidbits of dialogue from the show that Cassian has had great losses in his life. His father was hanged, and one of his siblings was believed to be killed as well. These events will likely spur him into action against those who committed these murders. Think back to Scottish hero William Wallace in the movie Braveheart, who took on the English after his wife was murdered. I did a little bit of research on the names Cassian and Andor, and the meanings of these names seem to jive pretty well with the character himself. The word Cassian has various meanings. The four I found were empty, poor, robbed, and hollow. Empty, robbed, and hollow are interesting given the personal losses that have occurred in his life. Robbed is also symbolic of how he was robbed as a child, and throughout his life he reverses that fate by robbing the Empire. Poor is also a good defining characteristic because we see in previews that he's a migrant in a foreign land without much means of money or anything. Now the name Andor, which is a variation on Andrew, means man or warrior, so the linkage to the character is pretty self-evident there. Now let's talk a little bit about the previews that we've seen for the show so far, and then we'll cap off the Andor discussion with one of the political controversies. So the first teaser trailer that came out a few months ago gave us a brief glance into Cassian as both an adult and as a child. As a child, his village is starting to see foreign invaders show up, and we even see the classic clone transport vehicle from the prequels. I'm guessing this must be shortly after the prequels, because the Empire did switch out to more Imperial-looking designs and left and replaced the Old Republic models. So we'll see this further in Season 2 of the Bad Batch animated series, which will be coming out next year. Let's discuss a few pieces of audio here. So here's the first clip I'm going to play. Here's Cassian discussing the Empire and those that work for the Empire.
They're so proud of themselves. So fat and satisfied.
Now in the ancient world, being quote-unquote fat was somewhat seen as a symbol of status or wealth or power. Most likely this was because the ones in power had more readily available access to food sources than the lowly peons. Being fat and satisfied in the context of this quote, Cassian is basically saying that they're so egotistical and out in the open about what they are and what they are doing that they don't give a chance to anyone looking to undermine their authority. They don't even think it could possibly happen. Flash forward to the conversation between Luke and the Emperor in Return of the Jedi. Here's another clip.
I assure you, we are quite safe from your friends here.
Your overconfidence is your weakness.
Your faith in your friends is yours. See for yourself. From here, you will witness the final destruction of the Alliance and the end of your insignificant rebellion.
Now just think about in our world, how in our face the corporate media and celebrities and government are about the things that they believe in. Things that used to be called conspiracy but are now just fact. But they don't seem to care and are unwilling to back down from their narratives and beliefs. Now on to our next quote.
Soon enough, these days will end.
So this is spoken by the character of Luthen, who Cassian meets with, and Luthen likely gives Cassian a leading role in the Rebel Alliance that is forming. Now when I first heard this quote by Luthen, I thought he was referring to further machinations of the Empire, in that they had yet to unleash their full totalitarian tactics on the galaxy. But as you will hear when we discuss the full clip released on Disney Plus Day September 9th, he's referring to quite the opposite. So we'll discuss that in a little bit. The final quote we'll discuss from this trailer is from actress Fiona Shaw, who plays a character named Marva, possibly Cassian's mother, but as of yet this is unknown.
People are standing up. That's what a reckoning sounds like.
Now reckoning is coming for sure. It makes you wonder if such a reckoning could or would happen in our world. People can only get pushed so far before they say no and decide to act. But unfortunately I fear that many people are still asleep at the wheel. Let's now move on to the first full trailer that was released. Now this trailer had some similar elements to the teaser, but with a lot of new stuff as well, specifically around the character of Mon Mothma, who we see in Rogue One and also in Return of the Jedi, as the de facto leader / figurehead of the Rebel Alliance. This trailer shows Cassian as a kid, at a time when Imperials showed up on his planet. He appears to be rummaging through Star Destroyers for stuff to steal, sell, or whatever. And he tells us how he's able to do so. Here's another clip.
To steal from the Empire? To just walk in like you belong? They're so proud of themselves. So fat and satisfied. They can't imagine that someone like me would ever get inside their house.
Going back to the earlier quote about fat and satisfied, the Imperials have had their heads so far up their you-know-what that having a spy in their midst is just inconceivable to them. I mean, who would want to infiltrate and harm the benevolent leadership of the Empire? Least of all, a poor commoner like Cassian. Now, the next quote here is probably my favorite.
The Empire is choking us so slowly. We're starting not to notice.
So he's talking about the infamous totalitarian tiptoe here that David Icke popularized, where rights are being slowly taken away and chipped away little by little that most people don't even notice. The analogy of boiling the frog basically comes to mind. Here's a clip from a while back of Jordan Peterson on Joe Rogan that comes to my mind as well.
To terrible places, one tiny step at a time. You know, if I encroach on you and I'm sophisticated about it, I'm going to encroach 2 millimeters. I'm going to encroach right to the point where you start to protest. Then I'm going to stop. Then I'm going to wait. Then you're going to calm down. Then I'm going to encroach again right to the point where you protest. Then I'm going to stop. Then I'm going to wait. And I'm just going to do that forever. And before you know it, you're going to be back 3 miles from where you started, and you'll have done it one step at a time. And then you'll go, oh, how'd I get here? And the answer was, well, I pushed you a little farther than you should have gone, and you agreed. And so then I pushed you a little farther than you should have gone again, and you agreed.
So, Cassian is a small-time smuggler or a burglar, or something like that. But Luthen is now, in this trailer, offering him a potential role in the ongoing rebellion, because rebel cells are starting to pop up all over the galaxy. And Imperial mentions in this trailer that there's pockets of fomenting, where fomenting is defined as incitement or arousal, as in a rebellion. Now here's another clip from rebel warrior Saw Gerrera, who's later called an extremist by the rebellion. His tactics are considered too brutal and violent even for the rebellion to be involved with. This wording, as he is talking to Luthen about joining forces, sounds an awful lot like what the worst totalitarian leaders say to guilt people into doing things that aren't in their best interest. Let me know if you've heard this before.
For the greater good.
Yeah, so that sounds a bit Nazi-ish to me. Now, here's another clip. This is Luthen talking to somebody who's concerned about how far he's getting involved with in this fight against the Empire.
You're slipping.
I'm not slipping. I've just been hiding for too long.
Now, I can relate to this quote quite a bit. Before 2020, I had no knowledge of any of the real truths that were buried underneath the mountains of lies we hear every day in the news. People have rolled their eyes or called me crazy for talking about some of the things I've been talking about since I've awakened myself to how the world really works. I was hiding, I was asleep for a long time, but now here I am, and it's time to speak out, and it's time to make a difference. So the last clip here is of Mon Mothma, and it presents an interesting dichotomy and cultural difference between the scenes that we've seen and heard so far. So far in the trailers, we've seen a lot of boots-on-the-ground activity against the Empire, like people stealing, fighting, spying, and so forth. A lot of the real dirty work that needs to be done. Now with Mon Mothma, we switch to the view of the rich and powerful, the upper crust of the galaxy, the senators, the government, the political aspect. Now, I will say that I'm super excited to see that Senate chamber again that was so prevalent from the biggest moments in the Star Wars prequels regarding Palpatine's rise to power, as we've seen it several times in these trailers. So Mon Mothma is scheming around and likely trying to draw political allies to her side. But this is also a very dangerous game. But a game she'll be playing with her mind and her words, instead of a blaster or a thermal detonator. Here's a quote.
As long as everyone thinks I'm an irritation, there's a good chance they'll miss what I'm really doing.
So for her, it's kind of a bait and switch game. Have the people think she's doing one thing, but is really doing something else entirely. Honestly, it's similar to how a friend of mine described Trump a few years ago. Now, mind you, this friend was not interested at all in politics or news or any of it, but he could definitely see how Trump was playing with the media to his advantage. He likened it to a pack of dogs outside someone's door. You open up the door, throw them some raw meat, and go back to the house and continue your work while they gnaw on the food. And the parallel here was how Trump would make outrageous statements in the press, and then just go back to work on more important things, hopefully. Now, how successful that tactic was for Trump is, still up for debate. But I thought it was an interesting analogy, because of how hungry the media was to rip apart any statement or quote he would make. It'll be interesting to see how Mon Mothma tiptoes around and plays the game, and also just to know more about her character in general. Now, there was an extended clip of this conversation between Cassian and Luthen that was dropped on September 9th, which gave some additional context to some of the quotes we've mentioned here before. Here's one of them.
The arrogance is remarkable, isn't it? They don't even think about us. These days will end, Cassian Andor. The way they laugh, the way they push through a crowd. The sound of that voice telling you to stop, to go, to move. Telling you to die. Rings in the air, doesn't it? Well, they'll think about us soon enough. Soon enough. We'll have something else to listen to.
So there's that quote again about the arrogance of the Empire, and also about what Luthen really meant by "these days will end." He was referring to the end of the Empire itself at the hands of the rebellion. The Empire will be forced to acknowledge that the rebellion was a real thing, and that it posed an imminent threat to them. Now, this clip I'm going to play now from Tarkin, from the original Star Wars, ties in pretty well before he's blown up on the Death Star. Because he was even so confident that the Empire would be victorious and that the rebellion would be squashed, that he refused to leave.
We've analyzed their attack, sir, and there is a danger. Should I have your ship standing by?
Evacuate? In our moment of triumph? I think you overestimate their chances.
So there you have it. That's my preview for Andor. But before we end this episode, we have to get into the controversy surrounding the show. Actress Fiona Shaw said the following in regards to showrunner Tony Gilroy and the symbolism behind the show. Quote, "Tony has written a great scurrilous take on the Trumpian world. Our world is exploding in different places right now. People's rights are disappearing, and Andor reflects that. In the show, the Empire is taking over, and it feels like the same thing is happening in reality too." End quote. Now, when I first heard this quote, my blood boiled and I got really pissed. I mean, how many times do we have to go down this everything is Trump's fault rabbit hole? Have these people looked at the current regime and given them a fair critique? Of course not. And that's precisely why this clip actually doesn't bother me anymore. Fiona is towing the company line. The narrative you have to say to continue working as an actor, and that is to bash everything that is not a liberal agenda. It's really funny to me, though, that she's taking shots at Trump and the removal of rights from people, when we currently live in a day and age where people lost their jobs over an experimental medical treatment, where people were not allowed to see their relatives in hospitals, where people were being beaten and harassed if they didn't appease the BLM gods, and now we're seeing people being fired for not respecting pronouns and people's made-up gender identities. None of these are Trump's fault. It's your team's side, Fiona, that is goading on this sort of behavior. But to tie it back to Star Wars, this is nothing new when a Star Wars story is tied to real-world politics. The Ewoks in Andor were meant to symbolize the Viet Cong fighting against the foreign invaders. The Empire itself was a takeoff of the Nixon administration, and in the prequels, George Lucas made no qualms about the fact that Bush and Cheney were parallels to Vader and Palpatine. Even the Military Creation Act in Episode 2 had deep roots in the military efforts after 9/11. And remember too, George Lucas grew up in California with very liberal sensitivities, and he's also mingled with many who share that same mindset. So we shouldn't be too shocked and outraged every time a Star Wars property is given a political lean to the left. It's always been that way. But that's partly the reason I do this podcast, because there are other points of view that can be taken towards Star Wars, not just the ones the liberal creatives see there. Art is subjective, and I've chosen to dedicate the time and effort to pull out the elements in Star Wars that relate to the deeper truths of our world and bring them to light through analogy and metaphor. In closing, I'm really looking forward to the show. TBD on the format of my podcast releases going forward in connection with this show. I know the show will drop on Wednesday, September 21st, In the first drop, we'll have 3 episodes included, so I may do a few episodes on that drop alone. Also, The Bad Batch Season 2 is coming back in a few months, so I'll dedicate some time to that as well. Stay tuned for more details, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of Conspiracy in the Force. As always, I'm your host, Conspiracy Kyle, signing off. May the Force be with you, and God bless. And God bless. God bless.